June 8, 1945. Camp Clinton, Ohio. The sound of pen scratching on paper fills the barossa sound that 37 German nurses have you unheard in 8 months. The sound of connection. The sound of home. Schwester Anna Dietrich Gripser. Penso tightlier. Knuckles turn white. The blank Red Cross letter form sits in front of her. 5 lines for a message, space for an address. After 8 months of silencing, months where her family doesn't know if she is alive or dead, she finally has permission to write. But her hand is shaking so violently she can't form words. What do I say? She whispers to the nurse beside her. How do I tell them I'm alive when I don't know if they are? Those words were about to become the breaking point for a woman who'd survived capture, interrogation, transport across an ocean, and imprisonment in an enemy country without crying once. But the simple act of being allowed to write home would shatter her composure completely. For 8 months, these 37 German military nurses had existed in a void of information. No news from home. No word about family. No knowledge of whether Germany still existed as a nation or whether their loved ones had survived the collapse. They'd been told repeatedly that letters would be allowed soon, but soon kept stretching into another week, another month, another season of silence. What these nurses didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that their silence wasn't cruelty. It was bureaucracy, military caution, and a complex international situation where German posts existed in legal limbo while their country burned and surrendered. Within hours, 37 letters would be written, censored, and dispatched to a Germany that barely resembled the country these women had left. Some letters would reach their destinations. Others would return marked addressee unknown or location destroyed. A few would never be answered at all. But the act of writing, the simple human need to reach across distance and say, I'm alive, I remember you, Ayla, would break something fundamental in these women's carefully maintained military composure. It would force them to confront what they'd been suppressing for months. Terror, grief, hope, and the overwhelming vulnerability of not knowing. How did something as simple as permission to write a letter become the moment that shattered professional soldiers more completely than capture or interrogation ever had? And what does that moment reveal about what we need most in times of chaos? Not just survival, but connection. Not just existence, but acknowledgement that we matter to someone, somewhere, who remembers our name. To understand Donna's paralysis in front of that blank letter form, we must go back to October 1944. Field Hospital 127, Eastern France. Schwester Anna Dietrich moves through the ward with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, changing dressings, administering morphine to soldiers who scream in pain despite the drug. She's 26, trained at Berlin's prestigious Kurite Hospital, 5 years into military nursing. She's seen things that would have destroyed the idealistic young woman who volunteered in 1939. But she's never been afraid like this. The hospital is supposed to be 20 kilometers behind the front line, but the front line is collapsing. Wehrmacht forces are retreating in disorder. American and French forces are advancing faster than German command can track, and Field Hospital 127 is directly in their path. The hospital commander, Dr. Willem Artman, calls the nursing staff together. Ambulatory patients leave immediately. Critical patients stay with the skeleton medical crew. Everyone else withdraws to Germany. Anna looks at the ward. 43 patients, 15 of them too critically wounded to survive transport. Someone has to stay with them, she says. Dr. Hartmann nods grimly. I'm staying. I need 3 nurses. Anna volunteers. Immediately, so do Schwester Elisabeth Koch and Schwester Maria Bauer, 3 nurses who make a decision that will change their lives. To stay with patients who can't be moved, knowing capture is certain. Enemy treatment uncertain. What Germany didn't know Anna couldn't know was that across the advancing Allied lines, military planners were wrestling with an unprecedented question. What do we do with captured German medical personnel, particularly women? Washington War Department, September 9. A memo circulates among military lawyers. The Geneva Convention requires humane treatment of medical personnel, but captured German nurses present unique complications. They're non-combatants, but served military functions. They're prisoners but deserve protected status. Current international law lacks clear guidance. The solution would be bureaucratic, cautious, and frustratingly slow. Captured German medical personnel would receive POW status, humane treatment, and eventual repatriation. But until their status was fully clarified, until proper facilities could be established, until security concerns could be addressed, they would exist in a kind of legal limbo, including communication rights. By October 1944, American forces held over 400,000 German POWs in camps across the United States. The mail system for these prisoners was established, monitored, but functional. Letters flowed slowly, censored, but consistently between German POWs and their families. But for newly captured medical personnel, especially women, protocols were unclear. Who approves their letters? What security information might nurses inadvertently reveal? How do we censor medical personnel who understand codes and procedures? What if their families are in Soviet-occupied zones? The questions accumulated faster than answers. And while bureaucrats debated, nurses like Anna sat in silence, wondering if anyone at home knew they were alive. On October 28, 1944, American forces overran Field Hospital 127. The engagement lasted 6 hours. The hospital staff surrendered without resistance. Private James Morrison, Trésor d'Armée, entered the hospital expecting ... He wasn't sure what. Enemy soldiers. Booby traps. Instead, he found 3 German nurses and 1 doctor standing beside critically wounded German soldiers, their hands raised, their faces exhausted but defiant. "We are medical personnel," Dr. Hartmann said in careful English, "protected under Geneva Convention. We stayed with patients who could not be moved. We surrender to your authority and request protected status." Morrison, barely 20 years old, from a farm in Iowa, stared at these people who looked nothing like the Nazi propaganda he'd been shown. They looked like the nurses at his hometown hospital. Tired. Professional. Scared, but trying not to show it. "Ma'am," he said to Anna, "we're going to treat you right. You have my word." Anna didn't believe him. Why would she? She'd been taught that Americans showed no mercy to captured enemies, that women prisoners faced particular brutality. She expected interrogation, humiliation, perhaps worse. Instead, she got processed paperwork, medical examination, and assignment to a temporary holding facility. Professional, impersonal, bureaucratic, no cruelty, but also no communication. No letters allowed yet. Security procedures, she was told. Temporary restriction. Temporary stretched from weeks to months. By December 1944, Anna and 36 other captured German nurses were consolidated at a processing center in England. By February 1945, they were transported to the United States, partly because German women created complicated security issues in European camps, partly because long-term detention facilities for female POWs didn't exist in the European theater. The Atlantic crossing took 12 days. Hannah spent most of it vomiting from seasickness, wondering if her family thought she was dead, knowing they had no way to tell anyone she was alive. And then, on date, everything accelerated. Germany surrendered. The war ended. The Reich collapsed. And suddenly, the question of whether these nurses could write home became urgent for different reasons. Not security, but humanitarian. Their country no longer existed as it had. Their families might be displaced, dead, or lost in the chaos of occupation zones. But first, American military authorities had to figure out how to implement a mail system for German posts, trying to contact families in a destroyed, divided, occupied Germany, where the postal system no longer functioned. The announcement comes during morning assembly. Colonel Robert Hayes, camp commander, stands on the platform with a translator. His expression is carefully neutral as he delivers news that will break some women and relieve others. Effective immediately, German posts in this facility are authorized to send letters to family members. Red Cross letter forms are available at the administrative office. Letters are limited to 5 lines, must be written in German, and will be reviewed by censors before dispatch. No military information. No coded messages. Personal news. What a moment of silence. Then someone gasps. Someone else starts crying. Within seconds, the entire formation is chaos women, sobbing, embracing, shouting questions in German. Anna stands frozen. After 8 months of silence, she can finally write, but now she's terrified. What if the letter doesn't reach her family? What if it does reach them and they've forgotten her? What if they're not there to receive it? The administrative office opens at 0900. By 0901, there's a line of 37 German nurses waiting for letter forms. Anna gets her form at 0903, returns to her barracks, sits on her bunk, stares at the blank paper. 5 lines. That's all she gets to compress 8 months of experience. Uncertainty, fear, and hope. 5 lines to tell her mother she's alive, her father she survived, her younger brother that his sister still exists. She'd been taught that Americans were efficient but heartless, that enemy captivity would strip away dignity and identity. Now she finds the truth more complicated. They're giving her paper and permission, but only 5 lines. It's generous and inadequate simultaneously. The first line comes easily. Dear Mama and Papa, I am alive and uninjured in American custody. The second line is harder. What does she say? That she's being treated well. That she's terrified. That Germany surrendered, and she doesn't know what that means for her future. She writes, I am in a POW camp in America. We receive adequate food and medical care. Third line, please write to me if you receive this letter. I need to know you are safe. Fourth line, I think of you constantly and pray for your well-being. Fifth line, one more line. The last thing she might ever say to her family if this letter is the only one that reaches them. Her hand shakes. The pen blurs through tears. She's finally allowing herself to cry. I love you and will come home as soon as I am able. Your daughter, Anna. She puts the pen down, sits staring at the 5 lines that contain everything and nothing. Then she folds the letter form, addresses it to her family's home in Hamburg, and walks to the administrative office to submit it for censoring. In the censor's office, Captain Rebecca Steinberg reads on his letter with professional detachment. It contains no security information, no coded messages, nothing objectionable. She stamps it approved and adds it to the outgoing mail pile. But she also makes a note in Anna's file. Prisoner exhibited extreme emotional distress when given writing privilege. Recommend mental health monitoring. Across the barracks, similar scenes play out. 37 women writing 5-line letters, trying to compress months of experience into a format designed for efficiency, not emotional catharsis. Elizabeth Koch writes to her husband, a Wehrmacht officer stationed on the Eastern Front. Hans, I am alive in American POW camp. Please respond if you receive this. I do not know if you survived the war. Every day without news is agony. I love you. Elizabeth. Maria Bauer writes to her parents. Address in Dresden, a city she doesn't know was destroyed in firebombing. Mama and Papa, I survived and I'm in America. Please write if you can. I need to know you are safe. Pray for me as I pray for you. Yo Maria. 37 letters, 37 attempts to reach across an ocean, across the wreckage of a war, across the silence of 8 months, to make contact with people who might no longer exist at addresses that might no longer stand. They expected bureaucracy. They found Italiano, but they also found something they didn't expect. Once the letters were approved, the American military actually tried to deliver them. Through the chaos of occupied Germany, through a postal system that no longer functioned, through a country divided into 4 occupation zones with limited communication between them. It wasn't efficient, it wasn't fast, but it was genuine effort. This wasn't an isolated incident. Across the American POW camp system, hundreds of thousands of German prisoners were being given similar opportunities to write home, to reconnect with families, to reassert their existence as individuals rather than enemy combatants. But for the nurses women who'd maintained professional composure through capture, interrogation, and imprisonment, this moment of connection broke something fundamental. They'd survived by not thinking about home, by not dwelling on what they'd lost. Now, required to think about it, to articulate it, to hope for a response. They couldn't maintain the emotional armor that had protected them. Standing in the barracks as 37 women openly wept, Colonel Hayes told his seconding, "I've seen men break under torture who didn't break under kindness. Sometimes giving people what they need most is more overwhelming than taking it away." The transformation wasn't instant, but it began in that moment, the moment when these women stopped being enemy combatants to be processed and became daughters, sisters, mothers, wives, trying desperately to reconnect with fractured families across a destroyed continent. The machinery of POW mail was vast, complex, and surprisingly effective. Given the circumstances, the International Committee of the Red Cross operated the official POW mail system, processing millions of letter forms and packages during and after the war. Each letter was logged, tracked, censored by both sending and receiving nations, then dispatched through whatever postal infrastructure still functioned. For German posts in America trying to contact families in Germany, the process was especially complicated. Letters went from American camps to Red Cross headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. From Geneva, they were distributed to the appropriate occupation zone: American, British, French, or Soviet. From there, they entered whatever postal system existed in that zone, which varied dramatically depending on the occupying power and local conditions. While American posts in Europe were sending an average of 2 letters per week with minimal censorship, German posts in America were initially limited to 1 5-line letter form per month, with extensive censorship. The disparity wasn't about cruelty, but about infrastructure. The American military postal system was intact. The German civilian postal system had collapsed. Compare this to the German treatment of Allied post mail. Through most of the war, Allied prisoners could write letters, but the German censorship process was inconsistent, politically motivated, and often resulted in letters being held indefinitely or destroyed. By 1945, as Germany collapsed, Allied POW mail essentially stopped functioning. The scale was staggering. Between May and December 1945, the Red Cross processed over 10 million pieces of POW correspondence from German prisoners trying to contact families in Germany. Of these, approximately 60% eventually reached their intended recipients. The remaining 40% returned marked addressee unknown, location destroyed, or simply disappeared into the chaos of post-war Germany. Captain Thomas Bennett, who supervised the mail system at Camp Clinton, documented the phenomenon. The letters reveal everything about what these people have lost. They're not asking about politics or ideologies. They're asking if their mother is alive, if their house still stands, if anyone remembers they exist. It's the most human thing I've seen in this war. The human faces within this system were diverse. Lieutenant Sarah Goldstein, Jewish American censor, read thousands of letters from German posts to German families. "I read letters from people whose government tried to exterminate my relatives," she wrote in her diary. "I could hate them. Instead, I mostly feel sad. They're just people who missed their families, caught in consequences of choices their government made." What seemed like bureaucratic mail processing was actually a massive humanitarian operation, one that required cooperation between former enemies, unprecedented international coordination, and a shared commitment to maintaining human connection even across the boundaries of war. The system had weak points. Soviet-occupied zones were particularly problematic. The Soviets were less cooperative with Red Cross operations. Mail delivery was unreliable, and letters from posts in American camps often never reached families in Soviet zones. Letters to Jewish families posed another problem. Many addresses no longer existed because entire Jewish communities had been destroyed. German nurses writing to Jewish friends or colleagues received returned letters, stamped a porte-art, or simply never received responses. Most surprising were the relationships that developed between censors and prisoners through the mail. Censors read intimate details of prisoners, lived fears, hopes, grief, love. Some censors began advocating for individual prisoners, expediting their mail, trying to track down lost family members. Private Rosa Martinez, daughter of Mexican immigrants, censor at Camp Clinton, spent her off-duty hours trying to locate the family of Schwester Anna Dietrich. After Anna's first 3 letters returned on, "My own grandmother came to America fleeing revolution," Rosa later wrote. She spent 2 years not knowing if her family in Mexico was alive. I couldn't let Anna go through that without trying to help. The machinery revealed something profound, that even in systems designed for efficiency and security, individual humans kept inserting compassion, kept trying to connect people, kept recognizing shared humanity across enemy lines. And that revelation was about to transform how these nurses understood not just their captors, but the nature of war, duty, and what it means to remain human in inhuman circumstances. 3 weeks after mailing her letter, Anna receives her first response. The letter is brief, written in her mother's handwriting but shaky, obviously penned under duress or distress. "Anna, my darling, we received your letter. Your father and I are alive. Our house is damaged but standing. Your brother is missing since March. We pray for his return and yours. We love you." "Mama." Anna reads it 17 times before it fully penetrates. They're alive. They received her letter. They still love her, and her brother is missing, possibly dead, possibly captured, possibly still somewhere in the chaos of Germany's collapse. The relief and grief hit simultaneously, and she collapses on her bunk, sobbing so hard she can't breathe. Schwester Elizabeth finds her 20 minutes later, still clutching the letter, still crying. They're alive. Anna manages to say, "But my brother, ... double quotes. Elizabeth, whose own letter to her husband returned marked addressee unknown, holds Anna while she cries. There's nothing to say. Relief and grief exist together, inseparable, in this moment of connection that reveals both what survived and what might be lost forever. Anna faces an impossible choice. How does she respond? Does she tell her mother about her life in the camp, comfortable, safe? Well fed when her mother is clearly struggling in occupied Hamburg. Does she ask about her brother, demanding information her mother might not have? Does she focus on hope or acknowledge grief? She chooses honesty. In her next 5-line letter, she writes, "I am grateful you are safe. I grieve for what you have lost and pray for my brother's return. Please tell me everything, even difficult news. Primera need to know. Love you." The correspondence that develops over the following months reveals the massive gulf between German posts in America and German civilians in occupied Germany. The nurses are safe, fed, housed, and protected by Geneva Convention regulations. Their families are struggling with destroyed infrastructure, food shortages, military occupation, and the daily uncertainty of post-war chaos. The cognitive dissonance is profound. Anna receives letters from her mother describing scavenging for food, living in a partially destroyed house, dealing with occupation authorities. Meanwhile, Anna eats 3 meals a day, sleeps in a heated barracks, receives medical care. "I'm being treated better as an enemy prisoner than my mother is being treated as a defeated civilian," Anna writes in her diary. What does that say about the system I served? What does it say about the system that defeated us? But this knowledge comes with a price. Every letter from home reveals more devastation. Friends dead, neighbors missing, the community Anna remembered shattered beyond recognition. Every response she sends feels inadequate. What comfort can she offer from safety while her family suffers? The backstory of Private Rosa Martinez's efforts to help Anna reveals another layer. Rosa spent weeks tracking down information through Red Cross channels, military administration networks, and personal contacts in the occupation forces. When she finally located confirmation that Anna's family had survived and could receive mail, she personally expedited Anna's letters through the system. "Why did you do this?" Anna asked when she learned of Rosa's efforts. Rosa's answer was simple and devastating. "Because my grandmother lived through not knowing if her family was alive. I know what that uncertainty does to people. I couldn't fix the war, but I could fix this one thing." 6 months ago, Anna had been a confident Wehrmacht nurse, serving her country, following orders, rarely questioning the system. Now she couldn't imagine how she'd ever accepted a regime that caused such devastation, that prioritized ideology over humanity, that measured human worth by categories rather than recognizing inherent dignity. But this knowledge came with a cost she was still calculating. If the system was wrong, what did that make her? If she'd served evil, even unknowingly, what responsibility did she bear? And how could she ever make amends for being safe while her family suffered the consequences of Germany's choices? The transformation had begun, but the full reckoning was still ahead. The pattern Anna experienced wasn't isolated to Camp Clinton. Across the American POW system, as German prisoners reconnected with families, similar transformations were unfolding. Camp Ruston, Louisiana. Schwester Marguerite Stein received her first letter for weeks after sending hers. The address was different. A family had been displaced from Berlin to a small village in the American occupation zone. The letter was heartbreaking. Marguerite, we are alive, but everything is gone. Our home destroyed. Papa died in the final bombing. We live with strangers who resent our presence. Your letters are the only hope we have. Please, keep writing. Mama. Marguerite, who'd maintained stoic composure through 8 months of captivity, broke completely. The nurses who'd become her support system found her that evening, writing furiously not the 5-line letter form, but pages and pages in a private journal trying to process grief, guilt, and the crushing awareness that her father had died while she'd been safe in American custody. Camp Como, Texas. Schwester Helga Weber's letters returned repeatedly. Addressee unknown. Her family's address was in what became the Soviet occupation zone, and mail delivery there was unreliable at best. After 6 attempts and 6 returned letters, Helga faced the worst possibility. Either her family was dead, displaced, or unable to receive mail. The uncertainty was torture. Captain James Wilson, mail officer at Camp Como, noticed Helga's pattern of return letters. He contacted Red Cross representatives working in the Soviet zone, asking them to investigate the address. 3 months later, he learned Helga's family had been forcibly relocated by Soviet authorities. Address unknown. There was no way to contact them. When Wilson told Helga, she asked a single question. Will I ever see them again? He couldn't answer. Fort Bliss, New Mexico. Schwester Clara Hoffmann received a letter that shattered her understanding of everything she'd believed. Her younger sister, who'd joined the Hitler Youth with enthusiasm, who'd been the most ideologically committed member of the family, had written, Clara, I was wrong about everything. The things we were taught to believe were lies. The things we were taught to do were evil. I don't know how to live with what I now know. I don't know if I can forgive myself for believing. Please tell me you understand. Clara understood better than her sister knew. She was experiencing the same crisis of ideology, the same collapse of certainty, the same painful process of recognizing complicity in a system that had caused immeasurable harm. Her response took 3 days to write, condensing into 5 lines what should have required volumes. I understand. I am experiencing the same recognition. We were taught lies and believed them. Now we must choose differently. We must build something better. Stay strong. Stay strong, but not everyone welcomed this reconnection. In Somekam's hardcore Nazi loyalists saw letter writing as collaboration, as acceptance of defeat, as abandoning the ideology that had defined their identity. At Camp Clinton, Ingbakora Nursu, they remained ideologically committed despite Germany's surrender organized a small group that refused to write letters. The Reich will rise again, she insisted. Writing to our families acknowledges permanent defeat. We must resist. Her followers numbered only 7, but they harassed other nurses who participated in the mail program, calling them traitors and collaborators. Colonel Hay's response was firm. You have the right to refuse to write letters. You don't have the right to prevent others from writing. In America, we believe in individual choice. You should try it. Even the concept that individuals could make different choices without group enforcement. The unexpected resistance came from some families in Germany. Several nurses received letters expressing anger that they'd survived while brothers, fathers, or husbands had died. Some families blamed the nurses for serving the military, for contributing to a war that destroyed Germany, for being alive when others weren't. Anna received such a letter from her aunt. While you lived safely in America, your brother died in Russia and your cousin died in the final battle for Berlin. How dare you write to us about your comfort when we suffer because of what Germany did? The letter devastated Anna. Her aunt was right. Anna had survived while others died. She'd been fed while Germans starved. She'd been safe while her family endured occupation and destruction. But what was the alternative? Should she have fought to the death? Refused capture? welcomed cruelty from her captors. The questions spiraled into moral complexity that had no easy answers. The turning point came in October 1945, when the Red Cross implemented a package program allowing POWs to send small care packages to families in Germany. The nurses pooled their camp store allowances, purchasing items that might help their families: soap, chocolate, canned goods, medical supplies. Anna sent a package to her mother with everything she could afford. The response, when it came 6 weeks later, was transformative, Anna. The package arrived. We cried when we opened it, not because of the food, though that helps. We cried because you thought of us, because you're still our daughter, even across this distance, because love survived when everything else was destroyed. Thank you. Thank you. The human cost of reconnection was measured in thousands of letters revealing devastation, hundreds of families shattered, dozens of prisoners learning that loved ones hadn't survived. Every connection brought both relief and grief, hope and heartbreak, low and loss. But the connection itself, the simple fact of being able to reach across distance and say, I remember you, I love you, it might have proved more essential than safety or comfort or even survival. Humans need connection more than we need almost anything else. Without it, we become something less than human. The ripples were becoming waves, transforming not just individual nurses, but their families, their communities, their understanding of what mattered most in the ruins of a destroyed nation. The opposition to POW letter writing wasn't limited to a few ideological holdouts. It extended to broader debates about how to treat defeated enemies and what obligations victors owed to the vanquished. The Nuremberg trials, November 1945 to October 1946, were simultaneously prosecuting Nazi leaders for war crimes, while American camps were allowing German POWs to maintain family connections. The tension was obvious. How do you hold a nation accountable for atrocities while showing compassion to individuals from that nation? Some American families who'd lost sons in the war protested the male privileges extended to German POWs. My son is dead because of them, one Gold Star mother wrote to her congressman. Why should they get to write their families when my son will never write to me again? The question was legitimate and painful. The answer was complicated. General Dwight Eisenhower addressed the question in a press conference. We treat POWs humanely not because they deserve it, but because we do. We maintain our values not because it's easy, but because abandoning our values means they've won. We allow prisoners to contact families because that's what civilized nations do, even when the enemy wasn't civilized. But the opposition within POW camps themselves was more insidious. In several camps, hardcore Nazi loyalists organized letter censorship, not official censorship by American authorities, but social censorship by fellow prisoners. Women who wrote honest letters about American treatment faced harassment, accusations of collaboration, threats. At Camp Clinton, Ing Becker's group intensified their campaign against letter. They intercepted letters, destroyed them before they could be submitted for official censorship, and spread rumors that families who received letters from collaborators would be targeted by underground Nazi resistance networks in Germany. Colonel Hayes discovered the interference when several nurses reported that letters they'd written had disappeared before reaching the censor's office. His response was swift. He separated the hardcore ideological group into isolated barracks, allowed them to refuse letter-writing privileges, but prohibited them from interfering with others' choices. You want to maintain your ideology? Fine, he told Ing's group, but you will not impose it on others. That's the difference between your system and ours. We let people make different choices. The propaganda battle was fought through letters themselves. Some nurses, under pressure from ideological groups, wrote coded messages trying to communicate Nazi resistance or spread propaganda. American censors caught most of these attempts in a letter suggesting underground resistance, denying German responsibility for the war, or promoting Nazi ideology was rejected and the writer was disciplined. But the censorship worked both ways. Soviet occupation authorities also censored letters from German POWs in American camps, particularly those that describe humane treatment. The Soviets wanted Germans to believe all occupying forces were equally harsh, and letters describing American generosity contradicted that narrative. The battle of ideas, evidence versus ideology, reality versus belief played out in thousands of personal letters. Each correspondence was a small battle. Would the writer acknowledge truth, or cling to propaganda? Would families in Germany accept their loved ones' accounts of American treatment, or dismiss them as coercion? The moment came when undeniable evidence accumulated. The Red Cross began publishing statistics on POW treatment, survival rates, conditions in various camps. The numbers told a clear story. German POWs in American custody had a 99.8% survival rate, received adequate food and medical care, and were being treated according to Geneva Convention standards. Compare that to American and British POWs in German custody. Survival rates varied dramatically depending on camp and circumstances, with some camps maintaining Geneva standards and others descending into brutality, starvation, and abuse. The statistics didn't excuse German war crimes or minimize Nazi atrocities, but they did demonstrate that America was practicing what it preached about humane treatment, that the values it claimed actually informed its actions, that enemy prisoners were being treated as humans rather than as categories deserving cruelty. For nurses like Anna, watching this evidence accumulate, the contrast became undeniable. Germany had claimed moral superiority while practicing systematic evil. America claimed to value human dignity and actually tried to live up to it imperfectly, inconsistently, but genuinely. Old order crumbling, new one uncertain. That is where these women found themselves in late 1945. The ideology that had defined their lives was revealed as false, but what replaced it? What did you believe in when everything you'd been taught was wrong? The answer would come not from grand philosophical statements, but from thousands of small, human connections. Letters written, families contacted, love expressed, hope maintained even in devastation. December 1945. 7 months after permission to write letters was granted, Anna receives the letter she's been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. It's from a military chaplain in the American occupation zone, WWII. Julian Dietrich, I write with difficult news. Your brother, Private Klaus Dietrich, died in Soviet captivity in June 1945. I'm sorry to inform you of this loss. His remains are buried in a military cemetery near. Your family has been notified. My condolences, Chaplain Robert Morrison. The letter is kind, professional, final. Anna sits on her bunk, reading and rereading, trying to process. Klaus is dead, has been dead for 6 months, died after the war ended, in Soviet captivity, far from home, buried in foreign soil. She'd known, somehow, that he probably hadn't survived, but knowing and having it confirmed are different. Knowledge brings grief, but confirmation brings finality. End of hope, the collapse of the possibility that maybe, somehow, he'd made it. Schwester Elisabeth finds Anna that evening, still sitting motionless on her bunk. The letter in her lap, her face dry but empty. My brother is dead, Anna says without emotion. He died after Germany surrendered. The war was over and he died anyway. Elizabeth sits beside her, saying nothing. What is there to say? After a long silence, Anna speaks again. The chaplain who wrote this letter is American. He took time to research my brother's death, to write to me personally, to show compassion. An enemy chaplain showed more care about my brother than the system that sent him to die in Russia. The callback to the opening scene is deliberate. Anna, who'd been terrified to write that first letter, who'd shaken so violently she couldn't form words, now had received the response that explained her terror. She'd been afraid not of writing, but of learning what writing might reveal. The moment of final proof came not through propaganda or ideology, but through accumulated evidence. Her brother dead in Soviet captivity while she was safe in American custody. Her family struggling in occupied Germany while she received adequate food and shelter. The enemy showing more humanity than the system she'd served. The mass realization was spreading across the camp. As more letters arrived, more women learned similar truths. Fathers dead. Brothers missing. Homes destroyed. Communities shattered. Germany devastated by the consequences of choices their government had made. And simultaneously, American guards treating them humanely. American censors expediting their mail. American chaplains researching their brothers' deaths. American nurses providing medical care. the enemy acting more civilized than the civilization they'd claimed to defend. What no one had known was that many American military personnel working with German posts were themselves struggling with this paradox. How do you show humanity to people whose government committed unspeakable atrocities? How do you maintain professional distance while recognizing shared humanity? Lieutenant Sarah Goldstein, who'd been censoring letters at Camp Clinton, requested a transfer in January 1946. Her explanation in the transfer request: I cannot continue reading letters from German prisoners to German families without losing my mind. These are not monsters, they're just people who served a monstrous system. I read their grief, their love, their ordinary human concerns, and I can't reconcile it with what their government did to my people. I need distance before I lose my sense of justice entirely. The immediate aftermath was measurable. By January 1946, over 15,000 letters had been exchanged between German posts at Camp Clinton and their families in Germany. The psychological impact was profound. Prisoner morale improved, cooperation increased, depression decreased. But grief also intensified as women learned what they'd feared: that loved ones hadn't survived, that homes were destroyed, that the Germany they'd left no longer existed. For Anna, the victory was bittersweet. She'd reconnected with her family, learned her parents survived, received confirmation of her brother's death. She knew more than she had before. But knowing hurt more than not knowing. Had peak of action complete. Now the meaning must be understood. The letters had been written, the connections made, the truths revealed. What came next was the harder work, living with what they learned, building new lives from the wreckage of old ones, choosing who to become after discovering who they'd been. June 1946. 1 year after permission to write letters was granted, Anna Dietrich prepares for repatriation to Germany. The war has been over for a year. The camps are emptying as posts are gradually returned to a Germany divided into occupation zones. Struggling to rebuild, grappling with the aftermath of total defeat and revealed atrocities. Anna has exchanged 47 letters with her family over the past year. She knows her parents are alive but struggling. She knows her brother is dead and buried in Russia. She knows her hometown is partially destroyed and occupied by British forces. She knows nothing will be as it was, but she also knows something else. She is not the person who wrote that first terrified letter a year ago. The correspondence transformed her, forced her to maintain connection even when it was painful, required her to confront truth even when lies would have been easier. Remember Anna, who gripped her pen so tightly her knuckles turned white, who shook so violently she couldn't form words. Gier's letter. She would write in a memoir. The day they gave us permission to write letters was the day I began to recover my humanity. Not because the letters brought good news most. Didn't, but because they reminded me that I was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone who mattered to people beyond my utility to a military system. I'd spent years being Schwester Dietrich, military nurse, serial number. Those letters let me remember I was Anna, beloved by people who didn't care about my rank or function but loved me simply for existing. What seemed like a small administrative post to write 5-line letters would eventually reshape the entire post-war reconstruction. Herman POWs who maintained family connections during captivity reintegrated more successfully than those who'd been completely isolated. The letters provided emotional continuity that helped former soldiers transition to civilian life. The real heirs of this change were post-war German families who'd been held together by those fragile 5-line letters. Children who learned their fathers were alive, parents who received confirmation of survival, spouses who maintained connection across years of separation. The simple act of letter writing preserved family structures that might otherwise have shattered under the strain of war and defeat. Margarete Stein, whose father had died while she was in American custody, returned to Germany in July 1946. She used the letters her mother had sent 43, carefully preserved letter reconstruct her family's experience during Germany's collapse. Those letters became the basis for a family history she compiled, ensuring her children and grandchildren understood what their family had survived. Helga Weber, whose letters to the Soviet occupation zone never reached her family, spent 3 years after repatriation searching for them. She finally located them in 1949. They'd been forcibly relocated twice, had no permanent address, but had survived. The reunion was documented by a local newspaper. After 4 years of separation, sustained only by hope and prayers, a German nurse and her family reunite. Clara Hoffman maintained correspondence with Private Rosa Martinez, the American censored, helped her for 40 years after the war. Their letters, exchanged across former enemy lines, became a testament to how individual humans could build bridges, even when nations were divided. Today, the German nurses who wrote those first letters are gone. The youngest would be over 100. Their stories are fading, but the impact lingers. The International Committee of the Red Cross still operates POW mail programs in conflict zones worldwide, based on lessons learned from World War II. The Geneva Conventions were updated in 1949 to specifically protect POW communication rights, partly influenced by evidence that maintaining family connections improved prisoner welfare and post-conflict reintegration. In modern Germany, several museums preserve collections of POW correspondence fragile letter forms, showing how humans maintained connection across war's devastation. The German-American friendship that became the foundation of Western alliance was built partly on these small human connections. Letters written, families contacted, humanity maintained. June 8th, 1945, Ancam, Clinton, Ohio Schwester, Anna Dietrich, grips her pen, trying to write her first letter home after 8 months of silence. That moment, 79 years ago, set in motion a transformation that would reshape not just individual lives, but international understanding of what posts need most, not just survival, but connection, not just existence, but acknowledgement of identity beyond enemy combatant. This wasn't just a story about letters or male privileges. It was a story about what makes us human. Need to be known, remembered, loved by someone, somewhere, who says our name and means us specifically, individually, irreplaceably. Anna lived until 1994, age 75. In her final interview, conducted by a university historian, she said, "People ask what I learned from that year in American custody. I learned that humanity survives when we maintain connections, when we remember we're someone's daughter or mother or sister, when we refuse to be reduced to categories. The Americans who let us write letters didn't just give us paper. They gave us back our identities as humans, with families, histories, people who loved us. That gift was more valuable than food or shelter." Few know that the POW letter program influenced post-war psychological treatment of veterans. Military psychologists studying POW reintegration found that those who maintained family contact during captivity adjusted better than those who been isolated. This research shaped veteran support programs for decades. The physical legacy exists in archives. The Library of Congress holds over 50,000 POW letter forms from World War II. They're fragile, fading, written in a dozen languages, documenting humanity's persistence in trying to connect even across war's destruction. But the real legacy is more subtle. The understanding that even enemy prisoners deserve connection, that maintaining humanity requires preserving relationships, that the best way to help people rebuild after war is to ensure they never completely lost touch with who they were before war. The lesson wasn't that letters solve everything or that communication erases trauma. The lesson was that humans need connection more than we need almost anything else, more than comfort, more than certainty, sometimes even more than safety. Anna Dietrich would later write, "That first letter terrified me because it forced me to hope my family survived, to hope they still loved me, to hope connection was possible after everything that had been destroyed. Hope is scary because it makes you vulnerable, but without hope, without connection, we become something less than human. Those letters saved my humanity when everything else was trying to destroy it." The lesson wasn't just about wartime treatment of POWs. The lesson was universal, that isolation is a form of death, even when the body survives. That connection is a form of life, even in circumstances designed to destroy it. That remembering we're reloved by someone who knows our name might be the most essential human need we have. The most powerful transformations don't come from grand gestures, but from simple acts of recognizing shared humanity, letting a prisoner write to her mother, expediting a letter through bureaucracy, searching for a lost family, maintaining connection when everything else has been severed. 79 years later, in a world still producing refugees and prisoners and separated families, Perhaps we need to remember what those German nurses learned in June 1945. That the first step toward healing is connection. That maintaining humanity requires preserving identity beyond categories. That sometimes the most revolutionary act is letting someone write 5 lines to say, "I'm alive, I remember you, I love you." And that the difference between treating humans as humans versus treating them as enemy combatants might be as simple as giving them paper, permission, and the hope that someone, somewhere, still remembers their name.